Hello, I'm Rod Peppiatt from the Avenue Uniting Church in Blackburn, Victoria, meeting on the lands of the Wurundjeri peoples of the Kulin Nation. Welcome. Focus today is on a story found in Matthew's Gospel, a story of Jesus where he challenges thoughts about entitlement. For the kingdom of heaven, said Jesus to the crowd with him, is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire labourers for his vineyard. After agreeing with the labourers for the usual daily wage, he sent them into his vineyard. Now when he came out about 9 o'clock, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace, and he said to them, "You also go into the vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right." So they went. And when he went out again about noon and again about 3 o'clock, he did the same. And about 5 o'clock, he went out and he found others standing around. And he said to them, "Why are you standing here idle all day?" They said to him, "No one has hired us." So he said to them, "You also go into the vineyard." Now when evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his manager, "Call the labourers and give them their pay, beginning with the last and then go to the first." When those hired about 5 o'clock came, each of them received the usual daily wage. Now when the first came, they thought they would receive more, but each of them also received the usual daily wage. And when they received it, they grumbled against the landowner, saying, "These last ones only worked an hour, and you've made them equal to us, who've borne the burden of the day and worked all day in the scorching heat." But he replied to one of them, "Friend, I'm doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for the usual daily wage? Then take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give this to this last the same as I give to you. Am I not allowed to do what I want to do with what belongs to me? Or are you envious because I am generous? So the last will be first, and the first will be last." Jesus told a story about a man who hired workers for his vineyard. A story I find both delightful and confronting, maybe even bizarre to our ears. A story where Jesus uses an outrageous idea to make a point, to demand attention and response, or at very least, to challenge people to think about the way of God, of life embracing sacredness in the context of the way things are. But what exactly is this outrageous idea? Is it the one that I'm sure people most go to first? The one that says, "It's not fair. Why should those people who do less work get paid the same?" Or might it be the response that says, "Each received what was needed"? This is not a story easily ignored, and nor was it meant to be. If it was, Matthew and those who told it before him would have most likely ignored it. Nor is it a story easily unpacked, and again that's probably the point. But it's an important one because it connects us with the ministry and the passions of Jesus. There are in this story many clear connections with his other parables that talk of heaven or the way of God, particularly in Jesus' controversial attitude towards the last and the least in society, towards people who are vulnerable, towards people placed on the fringes of society or beyond by society and the system, whether it be religious or political. This story picks up on the vulnerability of people for whom, for whatever reason, they had to wait round the town centre waiting for someone to employ them. Casual labour was as fragile then as it is now, maybe even more so. But as Jesus' story unfolds for us, just as it did for his listeners, all's okay until the bit where the labourers all get the same amount. They get what? How's that fair? Goes the question. Those hired last had no right to get the same. What's the owner playing at? This is an abuse of the rights of those hired first, isn't it? And there, Jesus' story gets interesting. There, it connects us with his vision and passion for the way of God, or as he calls it, the kingdom of God. I tend to talk more about the way of God or the vision or the shalom, because I think that's more helpful than kingdom. But that's me. In this vision, in the kingdom, as Jesus calls it, in heaven, people are treated according to their needs, not their expectations or perceived rights, whatever they might be. This parable sits in the midst of a series of teaching moments and stories in the structure of Matthew's Gospel. A series that draws Matthew's readers into alternative ideas and into thinking about the way the world is. The expression that the last shall be first crops up several times in this, and it's perhaps the key expression. Also, it's important to remember that when we use the word heaven, or the understanding of heaven for Jesus, was that it was as much about this world as what happens after it when we leave it. The idea that the last shall be first is not only alternative thinking, it's subversive thinking. It's subversive in the context of occupied Jerusalem. It's a challenge to the way and to the values of empire. And just as that's true then, for me, it also speaks into our version of empire in the Western market-driven world. It speaks to us of something that empire, or as I termed it, the market, can't achieve and has no interest in achieving, just outcomes for people. Just as surely as the Roman Empire had no interest in how their policies and so forth affected the people of Jerusalem, so too the market is designed to create competition. It's designed to create survival of the fittest, economically this time. The strongest, the fittest, the richest are the ones to whom the market allocates the right to survive. And need has no place in such a system. And it seems to me that our society has a nasty habit of insisting on the right of someone to unrestricted access to everything they want, and at the same time leaving others behind because, well, they don't really deserve to get on, do they? They don't work hard enough. If they're poor, that's really their own fault. At the same time, some people who talk about the need for everyone to be treated the same without recognising that this will simply reinforce the bias in favour of those already favoured. In Jesus' story, the employer kept his contract with the people hired first. They had what they needed to live, and they had what he promised them. But he also gave the labourers hired last what they needed to live. His act of grace was in recognising that they had the same needs as the first group, and in responding accordingly to that. Now, that was a different way of thinking, clearly, as people listened to Jesus' story, and it still is. And I think it gives us an important insight into the thinking and the actions of Jesus that matters if we want to follow his way. His parable, his story, his glimpse of the way of holiness in the world is grounded in a real human situation, and he applies spiritual principles to it. And they confront on several levels. They confront the willingness of some to devalue other people as less worthy or less hard-working than the rest of us. Think dole bludgers. He confronts on the level of the vulnerability of many people then and now to very arbitrary work and pay systems. In Jesus' story, the boss is generous, but still the labours are at his mercy. Just as so many workers in hospitality and other industries, just as so many overseas workers are vulnerable in this country, in this city. And on that same note, that note of the vulnerability and the generosity of the landowner, I think we need to recognise that the story doesn't try to explain itself by simply saying, well, the landowner is God and God's really generous, so we can stop there. That's there and implied for sure, but there's more to it. The story is about the way of God as Jesus saw it, the way of grace which rocks the boat if necessary, and which troubles worldviews and systems. This is a story of outrageous grace. There for those who've worked hard all day, and there for those who came in late. There for the people respected and the people ignored. It's every bit as outrageous and radical as the story of the gracious father and his son, the prodigal son, the story we call it, that Luke tells of Jesus. This isn't a manual for industrial relations, and nor is it meant to be. It's much more important than that. My Bible has a note in the bottom of it says that this story has nothing to do with industrial relations except for the freedom to decide one's own contract. Industrial relations manuals perhaps could be much improved if they took some note. This is a story which affirms the way of heaven as being less about a scale of rights and deserts and much more about grace, needs, and loving respect. It's a story that in the midst of those things finds God, finds holiness, finds sacred grace. And interestingly, there's a Hebrew word that talks about much of those things, or many of those things. It's the word shalom, which is used as a blessing of peace. Peace through a holy vision of life in which all are included and all have enough. Coincidence? Somehow, I think not. Blessings.